Alright, let's break this down. Imagine you're selling the most amazing mangoes on the planet. You ship them over to your buddy in another country, and he sells them. Simple, right? Now imagine his government suddenly says, hold up. For every box of mangoes you bring in, you have to pay us a 25% tax. That tax, that extra fee slapped onto your product just for crossing a border, is a tariff. It's basically an import tax. It makes your mangoes more expensive for the final customer. The government gets some extra cash. Local mango farmers who don't have to pay this tax suddenly look a lot more appealing. Now, why would a country do this? It's not just to be a jerk, usually. The official reason is to protect domestic industries. If American steel is getting crushed by cheaper steel from, say, India or China, the US government can put a tariff on foreign steel. Suddenly, the price of that imported steel shoots up, making good old American-made steel more competitive. It's a move straight out of the America First playbook. The goal is to encourage people to buy local, protect jobs at home, maybe even punish another country for what they see as unfair trade practices. It's economic defense, or at least that's the sales pitch. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. The country getting tariffed doesn't just sit there and take it. They get mad. Their businesses are losing money, their workers are losing jobs, their government feels disrespected, so what do? They often retaliate. They turn around and slap tariffs on products coming from the country that started it all. So, if the US taxes Indian steel, India might turn around and tax American almonds or apples. Apples. It's like a really expensive and boring slap fight, where the only people who get hurt are businesses and consumers. This whole thing can escalate into what everyone fears, a trade war. It's a tit-for-tat cycle of tariffs that can spiral out of control. One country raises taxes, the other raises them back, and suddenly, everything from motorcycles to medical devices costs more for everyone. Motorcycles, medical devices, it creates uncertainty, makes it impossible for businesses to plan for the future, and can mess up global supply chains that took decades to build. And that's exactly the drama that started unfolding between the US and India under the Trump administration. So, President Trump comes into office with a very clear, very loud message. America was getting ripped off. He looked at these massive trade deficits, where the US was buying way more from other countries than it was selling to them, and he saw a problem. His solution was simple and direct: tariffs. He believed that by making foreign goods more expensive, he could force companies to move production back to the US and bully other countries into giving America a better deal. His main target was China, obviously, but his trade philosophy was like a shotgun blast, and a lot of other countries, including India, got hit with the spray. For years, India had been part of something called the Generalized System of Preferences, or GSP. Look, I know it sounds like a boring government program, because it is, but it was a huge deal. The GSP basically let developing countries like India export thousands of different products to the US completely duty-free. No tariffs. It was designed to help their economies grow, but the Trump administration argued that India's economy was no longer developing in the same way. They pointed out that India itself had high tariffs on American goods, making it hard for US companies to sell things like Harley-Davidson motorcycles there. The argument was one of fairness, or, as the administration put it, reciprocity. If India wasn't giving the US fair access to its markets, why should the US give India special duty-free access to its own? So in 2019, the US officially kicked India out of the GSP program. On top of that, Trump had already imposed global tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018, citing national security concerns. He argued that a strong domestic steel industry was vital for building tanks and ships. India, being a major exporter of both metals to the US, got caught in that net as well. This wasn't just some minor policy tweak, it was a fundamental shift in the economic relationship between the two countries. For decades, the US had seen India as a strategic partner and a developing economy to be nurtured. Suddenly it was being treated as a trade adversary, a country that needed to be disciplined into playing by new rules. The message was clear: the old way of doing business was over. The era of America First was here, and every country, friend or foe, was going to have to adjust to the new reality of trade negotiations happening under the threat of tariffs. When the tariffs hit, they didn't hit everything equally. They were like surgical strikes aimed at specific industries. The first and biggest blow came in 2018 with the global tariffs on metals. The US administration slapped a 25% tariff on steel, and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports from most countries, and India was right in the crosshairs. Think about it. India had been exporting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of these metals to the US every year. These weren't just raw chunks of metal, they were things like steel pipes, tubes, and aluminum sheets used in American construction and manufacturing. Overnight, the cost of these Indian products for an American buyer jumped by a quarter. This was a massive shock for Indian metal producers. Companies like JSW Steel and Tata Steel, which had spent years building up their export markets in the US, were suddenly facing a huge price disadvantage. An American construction company looking to buy steel pipes now had a tough choice. Do they stick with their trusted Indian supplier and eat the 25% cost increase? Or do they switch to a domestic American supplier who is now, thanks to the tariff, the cheaper option? For many, the math was simple. The tariffs were designed to make American steel look better, and for many buyers, they did just that. Then came the second punch. The removal from the GSP program in June 2019. This was a broader, more insidious hit. While the steel and aluminum tariffs were loud and specific, the GSP removal was quieter but affected a massive range of products. We're talking about nearly 2,000 different items. This included imitation jewelry, leather goods, pharmaceuticals, and automotive parts. These were industries often dominated by small and medium-sized businesses in India. A small workshop in Jaipur making silver-plated necklaces or a leather factory in Agra making handbags suddenly found their products were no longer tariff-free. The GSP termination meant that these goods now faced the standard US tariffs, which could range anywhere from 3% to 7%. While that doesn't sound as dramatic as 25%, for businesses operating on razor-thin profit margins, it was a killer. These tariffs chipped away at their competitiveness, making their products just a little bit more expensive than those from other countries that might still have GSP status or a free trade agreement. The US was India's largest export destination for these goods, so losing this preferential access was a direct hit to the bottom line for thousands of smaller Indian exporters. So, what does a tariff actually do to a business? It's not just a number on a government website. It creates a ripple effect that starts in the boardroom and ends on the factory floor. For Indian exporters, the first thing that happened was a flood of frantic phone calls and emails from their American buyers. Buyers wanted to know, who will pay this new tax? Lower price from the Indian exporter to absorb it, or the American importer pays more and passes it to customers? That uncertainty put immense pressure on long-standing business relationships. Many Indian companies, especially big players in the steel sector and the aluminum sector, had to make a hard choice. Absorb the cost and take a profit hit or risk losing the business. Some split the cost with US partners, but margins still shrank. Less money to reinvest in new machinery, less money for research and development, less money to expand and hire more people. The tariff acted like a brake on growth. Smaller players were hit harder: handicrafts, jewelry, textiles. Many lost GSP benefits. They lack financial cushions. A small price rise could push big retailers like Walmart or Target to switch suppliers to cheaper options in Vietnam or Bangladesh. For a small business reliant on one or two US clients, losing a contract could be fatal. Orders dried up, production slowed, overtime pay was cut, then layoffs followed. The human cost hides behind economic stats. A laid-off worker in an Indian steel town or an artisan in a village who can no longer sell to the American market faces a real crisis. Families need food and must pay bills. Tariffs decided in Washington, D.C. had direct, painful effects on lives here. It wasn't just about trade deficits or security. It was about jobs, incomes, and economic security for countless people. Let's put some real numbers on this, because it's wild. Before the GSP program was axed, India was its biggest beneficiary. In 2018, about $6.3 billion of Indian goods entered the U.S. tax-free. When that privilege was revoked in June 2019, all of that trade faced new taxes. The Federation of Indian Export Organizations estimated the new tariffs would cost exporters an extra $240 million a year. That's $250 million in new taxes practically overnight. Now let's look at steel. In the year before the 25% steel tariff, India exported about $760 million in steel to the US. After the tariff, steel exports reportedly fell nearly 50% by the next fiscal year. Now, aluminum. Indian aluminum exports to the US were valued at around $330 million before the 10% tariff. Those exports also took a significant hit. The tariffs were making Indian metals too expensive and American buyers looked elsewhere. The impact varied by product. Some items that lost GSP status were devastated. Take imitation jewelry. Orders reportedly dropped significantly. Other products, like some pharmaceuticals, felt less impact. Why? For certain critical goods there aren't easy alternatives. An American company can't switch suppliers overnight for complex chemical compounds. They might have to absorb the cost because the Indian supplier meets required specs, but the overall trend was clear. Tariffs dragged on India's export growth to the US. While total trade might still grow for other reasons, targeted sectors were hurting badly. Data showed the US share of some tariff-hit exports began to decline. Exporters started looking for new markets in Europe. Exporters started looking for new markets in the Middle East. Exporters started looking for new markets in Southeast Asia. The numbers tell a story of disruption, reduced profits, and a forced, painful pivot away from a key trading partner. India wasn't just going to sit back and take this. New Delhi played it cool at first, trying diplomacy and hoping for an exemption. But when the US went ahead with the steel tariffs and then pulled the plug on GSP, the Indian government had to respond. In June 2019, after months of delays, India finally activated its own clapback tariffs. It was a classic tit-for-tat move. India imposed retaliatory tariffs on 28 specific American products. They chose their targets carefully, not random, but calculated to hit politically sensitive areas in the US. The biggest one was almonds. India is the world's largest buyer of American almonds, most coming from California. They did the same thing with apples, primarily affecting growers in Washington state. Walnuts, chickpeas, some chemical products. The message was clear. You want to hurt our steel industry? Fine, we'll hurt your farmers. Alongside this retaliation, Indian exporters and trade bodies went into overdrive. They couldn't just wait for the governments to sort it out, they had to adapt to survive. If the US door was closing, they needed other doors to open. European Union, the Middle East, other Asian countries, they sent trade delegations. They participated in international trade fairs. They tried to diversify their customer base. They wouldn't be so dangerously dependent on the American market. It was a painful but necessary lesson in not putting all your eggs in one basket. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the negotiations never really stopped. Both sides wanted a deal, but they were far apart on the details. So after all the drama, the tariffs, the retaliation, and the stalled negotiations, who actually won? The answer is, it's complicated, but it sure looks like almost nobody. Let's start with the Trump administration's stated goal. Reduce the trade deficit with India, protect American industries. The US trade deficit actually increased. 2017, $22.9 billion. 2020, $23.8 billion. On that front, the tariffs failed. They didn't rebalance trade. Did the tariffs help steel and aluminum producers? Maybe a little, short term. Domestic steel became more competitive versus imports. Some US companies saw a temporary boost in profits and production, but it came at huge cost to industries that use steel and aluminum. Car manufacturers, appliance makers, construction companies, all paid more for raw materials. Costs ate into profits or were passed to consumers as higher prices. So saving one steel job made the supply chain weaker. From India's perspective, clearly negative. Thousands of businesses, especially SMEs, saw profits shrink and market access restricted. Workers faced uncertainty and job losses. Tariffs forced costly efforts to find new markets. India is large and resilient, but tariffs were a significant headwind for export industries. Retaliation on American farm goods raised prices for Indian consumers, almonds, apples. Nobody likes paying more for snacks. Ultimately, mostly a lose-lose for US-India trade. It created enormous uncertainty. It damaged business relationships. It hurt producers and consumers in both countries. Instead of cooperation, it drove friction and mistrust. A real-world lesson. Protectionist policies can backfire. They fail to meet goals while causing widespread economic pain and disrupting global trade. Understanding tariffs isn't just about politics. It's about people, prices, and the pathways that move goods around the world. The more we see the full picture, the better we can navigate what comes next.